Good morning again, my brothers and sisters and friends.
Good morning, Brother John.
So finally, I've remembered to put my email address here. So again, for those of you who are photographing the screen or taking notes, please carry on doing that if that's good for you, if that works. But please be aware, I'm happy to send you, if you send me an email just saying, please send me the slides, I will do that. I'm happy to do that. So today, Jephthah's daughter, the devoted daughter. And Judges 11 is the key chapter. We've read from it. Thank you very much, Brother Brian, for that. It's a problem passage for many. Not because of the events themselves, brutal events happen in the Old Testament, but for the fact that God seems to so strongly approve of them, vicariously through approving of Jephthah. Jephthah is named as one of the great faithful in that catalogue of the faithful in Hebrews chapter 11. And since some believe that he sacrificed, i.e. physically killed, arguably even physically burned to death his own daughter, they understandably struggle that that's a man that would meet God's approval. So, these are the questions we need to answer, and I believe we can categorically answer without going outside of our Bibles. From within the Bible, I believe we can answer these questions. Is Jephthah participating in human sacrifice? Yes or no? And if so, how can Jephthah then be acceptable to God? If not, if that's not what he's doing, what actually happened to Jephthah's daughter? And perhaps even more importantly, if there's no human sacrifice in this story, what on earth is this story all about? It has no focus if it's not about that, it seems. Perhaps most importantly of all, the question, where's God in all this? One thing we can be sure of is there seems to be outright chaos playing out on the ground, and God's sitting back in his armchair, letting all of this happen without apparently intervening. Why does he seemingly not intervene? We are going to try and address all of these things. And part of the reason we had that reading, particularly the first 11 verses, and if you're the type to have your Bible open in front of you, that's great. In those 11 verses are so many clues. Jephthah's daughter turns out to be something of a murder mystery, if you will. And the clues you need to solve what happened are actually given in those early verses. And there's not a single wasted verse. That's not a surprise to you, of course. There's not a wasted verse in the Bible. But there's not a wasted verse in that opening. In each of those verses, one little fact is given to you that's going to be critical in solving who did what to whom and why. And there's the question I forgot. Is any of this relevant to 21st century disciples? I mean, it's nice to solve a mystery that happened many, many years ago, but where's the lesson for us? Is there one? And if so, what would it be? Here's the little facts we're given. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but we're also told he's the son of the region's founder. We know that because his dad's name is Gilead, and like most rather arrogant men, they tend to name whole areas after themselves. Gilead, classic example, of course, in the southern part of Africa was the English military soldier Colonel James Rhodes, who tried to name an entire country after himself, and there was a country called Rhodesia for the longest time, because for that reason, thankfully, in the late 70s, that was corrected. It's now Zimbabwe on its own terms. His father was a Gilead, but his mother was a prostitute. Why do we need to know that? Why are we just dragging that rather unsavory detail in? It means that he's a half-brother. The other sons of both father and mother are kind of more kosher, if you will. But he's a godly man. These are all the verses we kind of didn't read. Jephthah gives this big synopsis of history to the Amorites, and he basically says, whenever Israel wins a war, it's not Israel that's winning, it's God that's winning, and God gives us the victory. So he's a very humble, very godly, very informed man. So that's relevant. We do recognize that. And he is, of course, commended for his faith. Here are those verses in Hebrews 11, commending the great men of faith, and Jephthah stands amongst them under the spirit of whoever wrote the letter to the Hebrews. Let's look at the storyline and we'll see how this all develops. Gilead's wife bore Gilead's sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. you're not going to get any inheritance in our family. Now, they're talking about inheritance. So I think this must be the point where the father, Gilead himself, has passed away, and the inheritance is being divided up. And they're realizing, you know what, if we get rid of this half-brother, everyone else gets a bigger share amongst the, quotes, real brothers. So they said, well, you're not a real brother, you're a half-brother. So you are the son of another woman, so get out, penniless. And so they drive him out. And he's driven out into what's called bandit country, what is effectively bandit country. Now, the version of the Bible from which Brother Brian read put that he was surrounded by, and I did smile, adventurous men, or the adventurers. That's a real euphemism, isn't it? Where have you been today, son? Well, I've been out with my adventurous friends. And we'll stop that right away. That's clearly bad news. And sometime later, the elders of Gilead. Who are the elders of Gilead? You know already. The elders of Gilead are his brothers, right? Gilead was top man. Now Gilead has passed away, so the elders of Gilead are the remaining true brothers. So the elders of Gilead, that's Jephthah's brothers, went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. That's where Jephthah's gone. He's gone to Tob to live with these bandits, basically. Come, they said, be our commander. Because by this point, Jephthah has developed a reputation as being a mighty warrior. He's developed that reputation living in bandit country. He's basically been thrown to the wolves, and he's managed to survive and indeed rise to be their leader, so that we can fight against the Ammonites who have invaded. I said Amorites earlier, my apologies. But Jephthah said to them, wow, you've got a cheek. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he says, isn't it? You threw me out of house and home, penniless, denied me any inheritance that I was entitled to, and now you're in trouble because the Ammonites have invaded and you realize I can fight a bit. You want me to come and save you. Goodness me, you have got a cheek. And it's some time later. How long later? We're not told, but by now, Jephthah has a daughter whom we'll later realize is probably a teenager. So we're talking approx 20 years. 20 years later, this has happened. Jephthah is still mad about being thrown out of house and home. And it's been, we guess, about 20 years. This isn't next week, all right? So he's still mad about something that happened about 20 years ago. That, again, is very relevant to the storyline. We need all of these details. We're not just telling a story for the sake of it. So the elders of Gilead, remember, that's his brothers, said to him, well, you can be our chief. And Jephthah answered, will I really? He doesn't trust them. It's like, I'll go fight against the Ammonites, and if I win and come back and say, okay, I'm your chief, they'll just say, nah, kidding, go away. Right? So he doesn't trust them. The elders of Gilead replied, the Lord is our witness, we will certainly do as you say. Is that good enough? Nope. Jephthah says, that's not good enough either. Come with me to Mizpah and repeat all of your words, make a vow before Yahweh in Mizpah. And do you remember what Mizpah is? It's a heap of stones, right? It's an altar before the Lord, but it has a very special meaning. Mizpah was set up by Jacob and Laban. And the reason it was set up is because Jacob said to Laban, I can't trust you as far as I can throw you. And justifiably. And Laban turned back to Jacob and says, yeah, I feel the same way. So this is what the altar's for. And both of them are praying, please God, watch this other guy because he's really untrustworthy. And both of them are right. So this is the altar that was set up for people who don't trust each other. And so Jephthah, who knows his history really well, says, why don't you come with me to Mizpah? And you can repeat all your words before Yahweh then, because I don't trust you. You've thrown me out of house and home once already. A place where parties didn't trust each other made contracts. That's the historical origin of Mizpah. So Jephthah is insisting on taking control of Gilead's people. He says, if God gives me the victory against the Ammonites, I insist on being your head. Why? Maybe he's just a proud and arrogant man who wants to boss people around. We know that's not his character. His character, these are the verses we didn't read. It's what I told you, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can read them for yourselves or pick one. In each example, he's going on about how We have no strength. Only God is our strength. Even if we win a battle, it's because God has won for us, and we have merely been faithful servants to his word. This is a very faithful man. This is not the type of man who wants to take control of a nation out of pride and self-glory like Colonel James Rhodes, for example. This is a very different, godly type of man. Jephthah's a humble man. His desire for control of the people isn't from pride, but he does need that power because he's got a plan. Don't yet know what that plan is, but it requires him being able to have authority over his brothers, which he's now secured because they've made that vow at Mizpah before Yahweh. This is his plan. And these words are spoken by Jephthah to God. If you, Lord, give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. That is his choice of phrase, which has caused untold confusion for literally centuries. We ask, did Jephthah intend to perform human sacrifice by fire, or even risk performing human sacrifice by fire? Did he intend to? It's an important question if we're to admire this man as a mighty man of faith. Let's check that we're all on the same page about what God's opinion of sacrifice, human sacrifice by fire is. It is detestable to God. He says so many times. Ahaz sacrificed his son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out. Israel sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire, so it did happen, even by the Hebrews, provoking the Lord to anger. They have built the high places, says Jeremiah, to burn their sons and daughters in the fire. Something I did not command, that verse continues, nor did it even enter my mind. What an amazing metaphor. God says, God who knows everything said, it never came into my mind that someone would set their child on fire. That's how detestable it is. By hyperbole, God could not even have thought of it. You do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates, says the law. You even burn your sons and daughters in the fire. Let no one sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire. Anyone who does is detestable to the Lord. I think that's enough examples. But I want to point out, obviously, this is all Old Testament stuff. It's written in Hebrew, not English, but there is a commonality. The phrase is the same in every time. In the fire, in the fire, in the fire, in the fire, in the fire. I forget the Hebrew words. I knew them once. It's the same phrase that's detestable. And the important part is, that's not what Jephthah said. Jephthah said, whoever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering. That's a different phrase. Now you might say, are you sure you're not splitting hairs? I mean, what do you think happens to a burnt offering? They don't get a massage and sent home with an ice cream, you know. I get what's happening. But it is relevant. It's a different Hebrew clause. So what is detestable to God, which is setting your children on fire, isn't exactly what Jephthah said. That's super important. Because in fact, let's prove that Jephthah did not even intend to set anyone on fire. Now, proving things, I'm a scientist. Proof is almost impossible. Right? You can only ever have evidence that suggests. Very rarely can you provide a proof for something. But within the construct of the Bible, occasionally it is possible to prove things. And this is one of those happy circumstances. We can prove that Jephthah did not even intend to set anyone on fire. How? Ezekiel tells us how. And it's not the place you go to solve Jephthah's daughter, the prophecy of Ezekiel, but it should be, because here's where the answer lies. God is speaking via Ezekiel. When you offer your gifts, the sacrifice of your sons in the fire, you continue to defile yourselves. Am I to let you inquire of me, O house of Israel? As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I will not let you inquire of me. To paraphrase, If you sacrifice your children in the fire, I will not even listen to your prayers. That's what he's saying. I won't even let you inquire of me. You'll be talking, I won't be listening. But here's the point. Jephthah prays to the Lord. Let the Lord the judge decide the dispute this day between Israel and Ammon. And God listens to his prayer and answers his prayer, and answers his prayer positively by sending his own Spirit upon Jephthah. So if God has even listened to the prayer and granted the request, Jephthah could not have been intending this. Because if God is consistent, he says, if you intend to set anyone on fire, I'm not going to listen to you. But I listened to Jephthah. Therefore, Jephthah could not be intending to set anyone on fire. God listens to Jephthah's prayer and responds favorably, thereby proving Jephthah isn't intending to burn anyone. Whatever he is intending, we've yet to solve, but it's nothing to do with fire. So when he says as a burnt offering, he's using that as a metaphor. It obviously hasn't come into Jephthah's mind that anyone thinks he's going to set anyone on fire. Jephthah's a godly man. Unfortunately, many people who read the Bible read Judges 11 and say, this man's going to set someone on fire. And then God approves of him in the list of the faithful. This God is terrible. So Jephthah is using a burnt offering idiomatically. But what does it mean? Well, that's relatively easy to sort out. We just look at what a burnt offering, actually what the characteristics are. If the offering's a burnt offering, says God, then you need to offer a male without defect, and the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. That's very rare, to use the whole beast. Usually you cut out these portions and that portion. So the characteristics of a burnt offering are, number one, the entire animal was utilized. That was unique to the burnt offering. No other offering had that characteristic. So that's critical. The subject had to be a male without defect. Right? That was what you had to use. And it was generally a free will offering. It wasn't something God commanded. That's not always true. But generally, a burnt offering was something that someone decided to do for themselves, as Jephthah has done. So we now know what Jephthah's planning. He's planning this. He's planning a free will offering to God, where the subject will be a male without defect, and there'll be some element of wholeness or entirety that will be given to God. Jephthah plans to give a male without defect to the Lord wholly, probably meaning forever. Okay? That's how we solve that. That's what his solution. In fact, Jephthah isn't the only one who's made this sacrifice. Hannah does exactly the same thing. Hannah didn't use the metaphor burnt offering, and as a result there hasn't been confusion about Hannah for centuries. If only Jephthah had used different words, much wouldn't have happened. Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord and made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. It's a free will offering. It's a burnt offering. Hannah may well have just said, I will give him to the Lord as a burnt offering, because it's a free will offering. It's a male without defect in the sense that Samuel will be so young he won't be responsible for sin legally at that stage, so he'll be without defect at that point, and he is given for all the days of his life. So Hannah gives Samuel to the Lord as a burnt offering. She just didn't use that phrase. Hannah is offering her firstborn son for lifelong temple service. Oh, that's relevant, because that's what she's actually doing, yeah? She's not only is she not setting him on fire on the altar, what she's doing is saying, you will now go to the temple and serve God for the rest of your life, which, of course, Samuel did. So when Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child, his only child. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, Oh, my daughter, you have made me miserable and wretched, because I have made a vow to the Lord I cannot break. And this is the bit that always trips us up. And we're thinking, what an idiot. Who else was going to come out of his house? He's got one daughter, and because it's the only child, and he hasn't had more children, you kind of infer from that, most likely the wife has passed away, which is why there are no more children. So it's him and his daughter living together. He's like, whoever first comes out of my home to greet me, who else is it going to be? It's ludicrous for him not to expect it to be his daughter. But he does expect it not to be his daughter. Why? And the clue is given on the screen. And it's all those early verses in the chapter that you should be able to solve this. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah. Jephthah doesn't live in Mizpah. Jephthah lives with the adventurers in Tob. Yeah? So where's his daughter? His daughter is safely in Tob, a couple of days' journey away. She can't come out of the house in Mizpah. She doesn't live there. Well, obviously she does, so we're going to have to figure that out in a minute. But he's gone to a house 2 days' journey away from where his daughter is to the northeast. Now it says it's his home, but it's not his home because he lives in Tob. Jephthah doesn't live in Mizpah, he lives in Tob. So whose home is it? Whose is the only home that you can call home that is not your home? Brandon, tell us. Your parents' house, yeah? When you finally move out of your parents' house and you rejoice, and most likely your parents rejoice, and mine certainly did, you get your own home, and you go home to your home. And yet, I live in Capitola, California, 2,500 miles one direction. 2,500 miles in the other direction is my parents' home. It's not unreasonable for me to get on a plane in San Francisco and saying, oh, I'm just going to nip home and see the folks. Right? They're 5,000 miles apart. One's my real home, but you never stop calling your parents' home, home. Where's Jephthah's parents' home? Mizpah is in Gilead. You know that. It says so in verse 29, if you didn't know. Mizpah is where his parents' home is. It's where Dad is, but Dad's passed away. It's where Mom is. Mom may well have passed away by now. And it's where those beautiful, loving brothers are. So you see the plan, don't you? He's coming home, and he's like, okay, God, you pick. I don't mind. I hate all of them. You pick which one, and we'll put him in temple service. And so he's stunned when the one person who shouldn't be there comes gambling out of the house to meet him. And his plan has gone horribly, horribly wrong. His family home in Mizpah, he's targeting one of his brothers. He's been mad for more than 20 years that they booted him out of house and home, and he probably nearly died in bandit country before he found his feet. And now he's going to get one. We do need to clear up one rather troubling detail. Having successfully proven that Jephthah's daughter can't possibly be there, she is there. So how does that work? Why is she? It's not completely ridiculous, of course. She's basically in her grandparents' house. And for a granddaughter to be in a grandparent's house is by no means ridiculous. Why was she there? What drove her there? Was it a cunning plot by the brothers to bring her there and push her out the front door first? No, because if Jephthah felt that he'd been tricked by these brothers that he's already angry with, he would be apoplectic with rage, and I don't think any single one of them would live till the end of the day. So we can't think this was a plot by the brothers. It's not a plot by the brothers, it's a plot by her. Because she's not filled with bitterness and rage. She's filled with love and celebration. My dad is the hero of Israel, and God has been praised today. Israel has defeated Ammon. I know what I can do. I've heard that my father, the commander, is going back to Mizpah before he comes back to Tob. I will go and meet him there with joy and gladness and celebration, and maybe even that rift that he always bangs on about every dinner time that's been going on for 20 years, maybe in the celebration of Israel defeating Ammon, maybe that rift will finally be healed What a beautiful idea. And she had a tambourine. And of course that made me think of, yes, she knows her history. We know Jephthah knew his history really well. He obviously taught his daughter well. She'll know of a time when it was appropriate for a woman to lead and come out with the sound of singing and with the sound of the tambourine to celebrate God's victory over, in this case, Egypt, and now in her day over the Ammonites. So she takes a tambourine and she dances out of the house to be the first to greet her father. What an absolute mess Jephthah has made of everything. God has won. Israel has won. His daughter is inspired correctly in a godly spirit to celebrate the victory of God. And he's come back with this stupid vow that says whoever first comes out of the door is going to be consigned to temple service forevermore and therefore won't have a family. I'm going to cut off one of the lines or the line of one of my brothers. And I don't care which one. God can pick. Trouble is, God does pick. And God shows Jephthah what his vow was worth. Let's just solve the story then. So now knowing the answer, we see how the story makes sense. Jephthah was a godly man whose answered prayer proves from Ezekiel he was never intending human sacrifice. That we can shove out of our mind right away. That's completely misleading. But we know Jephthah had been totally embittered against his brothers for, quotes, some time. And since a teenage daughter came to be in that time, about 20 years. We know that Jephthah insisted on establishing total authority in Gilead, which would give him power over his brothers that they could not refute if he came back from the battle and said, now one of you is going to go over here and I have the authority. We know that Jephthah vowed to devote someone from his family home in Mizpah to the Lord. And we know he vowed to offer them as a burnt offering, as Hannah had done with Samuel, i.e. a male without defect, to be given wholly. Jephthah planned vengeance on one of his brothers by sending them into lifelong temple service. Perfect plan, only it didn't work. Do you notice that I bet Jephthah enjoyed that? If he's as twisted-minded as I am, I get it. So for it to be a burnt offering, do you know what the sacrifice has to be? Not just a male without defect. Why was he thrown out of home? You're a defective son. Your mother was a prostitute, not our mom. Get out. You're defective. We're not defective sons. And so Jephthah's going, oh, well, I'd sacrifice myself, but hey, I'm defective. I need one of you perfect boys. Right? It's got to be a male without defect. That's a clever, I'm sure he thought of that. My father, the daughter replies, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you have promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request. She said, give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry. So the fact that she mourns her virginity, not death, again, is strongly suggestive. She's not about to be killed, she knows that. But she won't now have a family, which appears to have been her dream, and a very normal dream at that. We do notice, again, how old was she? We're not told. Well, her response, looking at her words, is clearly mature. This isn't the response of a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. This is a mature adult response. She's not already married, we know, and marriage age would have been early to mid-teens in that culture. So she's somewhere in her mid-teens is the most likely answer, a teenager before the Lord. But then, now we have extra questions to answer. Okay, we've successfully proved what's going on. So if Judges 11 isn't about human sacrifice by fire, what is it about? And perhaps we've seen, and this is where it comes all the way home, certainly into my life and potentially into yours. I mean, because I'm not worried about our community saying, how many of you actually want to set your children on fire? And the answer is probably not many. Most of the time, hopefully. I'm watching for some knowing glances. But this is what it's really about bearing grudges. This whole mess came about because Jephthah couldn't let go that his brothers had sinned against him. There's no doubt his brothers did sin against him. No doubt. There seems little doubt they never repented. Taken. Every single person in this room has had someone sin against them and refuse to repent. Are you going to carry it for 20 years, or are you going to let it go? That's what Judges 11 is about. It's one of the most relevant chapters to modern life in the entirety of the Old Testament or the New. It's the most common problem of all. And in Jephthah's case, bearing that grudge led him to take revenge and pretend it was some sort of service to God. God, I'm going to give you a servant forever. God knows. He's like, no, you're not. You just want to beat up on one of your brothers. Really? That's your idea of a sacrifice to me? You want to sacrifice something meaningful to me? Fine. I'll make it true. I'll make your wish come true, and you really will sacrifice something meaningful to me. You will sacrifice to me your only child. And that was more than he was willing to give. In fairness to Jephthah, he gave it. Keep your promises is a lesson that comes out, and here's where Jephthah does well. Jephthah is named among the faithful, and I think the reason why is he didn't weasel out of his vow after he sees it's destroyed himself, destroyed his happiness, destroyed his own family line. He kept his promises. Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary, says David, who may live on your holy hill? He whose walk is blameless, who keeps his oath, even when it hurts. And that hurt Jephthah so much that his day of mighty triumph turned into a day of personal weeping. But he kept his oath. And let's credit the leading lady here, because she was the one who enabled him to keep his oath. She could have refused and run, and Jephthah would have borne the guilt. He would have been the oath breaker, not her. She never agreed to that nonsense. But she took the lead, as our leading ladies always do. It says, my father will do this properly so that God is honored. My life is ruined by your bitterness. Your life is ruined by your bitterness, but we will honor the Lord. And they did. Don't bear grudges. Keep gifts to God sincere. Now let's look at the whole thing. We're just going to sort of back up and look at the whole big picture of what's been happening here. Jephthah's father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Why was his mother a prostitute? And I'm not pointing the finger at her. I'm pointing the finger at him, Gilead. You have a wife. Your wife is fertile and clearly bearing children, sons, and yet you also have been enjoying a prostitute. Why? Oh, I know why. Because you're selfish. Because you've got power, and when a man's got power, he's going to abuse it. Because that's what we do. The region's leader indulged his selfish desires to the maximum. And though he had a wife, he took a prostitute as well. His child paid the price. Jephthah paid the price for Gilead's selfish indulgence. And what happens? These things are cyclical. I will sacrifice whoever comes out as a burnt offering, says Jephthah. Jephthah sought power in Gilead in order to exact his personal revenge. This wasn't God's will. God wasn't going to be honored by this. His child paid the price. The leading lady, the daughter, paid the price. Both times you have selfish fathers exacting their personal agenda to their own personal pleasure, and both times it's the child who pays the price. Both leaders' fathers abuse their power, and both times a family is broken up as a result. This is what happens when man rules and takes over God's rule. Families get broken, children get hurt and pay the price for the selfish indulgence of their parents. Jephthah devoted his teenage daughter to the Lord, and Hannah devoted her young son Samuel to the Lord. To find a time between those two events is difficult. It varies enormously if you look at different commentators. You can get anything from near coincidence to almost 100 years apart. The time between the two events appears most commonly to be taken as about 30 years. Because we need to answer our final question, where's God in all this? Just sat back watching human men be selfish and destroy their own lives and the lives of other people? Or is he active? He's building families, as a good father would. Where is he building families? He's building families. Consider these two events, and consider them about 30 years apart. Samuel grew up to respect the Lord. And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with men. But that's not due to Eli the high priest being there. We know that. How do we know that? Because Eli the high priest's fathering quality was terrible. Eli's sons were sinful. And you might say, well, hang on, you can't blame the sins of the son on the father. And you can't normally, but you can if the Bible tells you it's the father's fault. And in this case, the Bible tells us, yes, Hophni and Phinehas were terrible because Eli, even though he was a faithful priest, was a terrible father. Maybe too indulgent, I don't know. We're not told the nature of his failing. So if Eli wasn't a good father and Samuel grew up to respect the Lord, Eli's sons were wicked men. They had no regard for the Lord. We have to ask ourselves, who was living in the temple to act as a godly parent to influence the infant Samuel? Jephthah's daughter is sent into temple service. About 30 years later, a little boy from Hannah is sent into permanent temple service. There is no doubt in my mind that Jephthah's daughter raised the infant Samuel. They were both sent to the temple. They were both there. Think of it from her point of view. You know she wanted to marry. She wept 2 months in the hills because she couldn't. And when she goes to the temple, perhaps like Leah, she prays, please let me have a child. No. Please let me have a child. No. Please let me have a child. And if 30 years have gone by from this teenager, then the window of natural opportunity to bear children has perhaps closed. And she knows or suspects that the answer must be permanently, you will never raise a son. And just when that window is closed, and there's no chance of her having a son, here appears a weaned little boy, a boy in need of a mother, for a mother in need of a son. This is God's hand. And this is how God works. So quietly, the still small voice. You need to read your Bible so carefully to hear this voice. You can blast through that story and just end up angry that someone set their daughter on fire, completely missing everything. This is what God did. And not only a son, she got to raise Israel's last and greatest judge. It's an amazing story, and I find it beautiful. Thank you.